Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Talent Playbook Podcast. My name is Jason Ferrara. I'm the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Outmatch and your host for the podcast. Our podcast focuses on strategies for transforming your world of work. During each podcast, we'll highlight someone who's transformed their organization or industry in a significant way. Today's guest is Sam Summers, the owner of First Fleet Concerts in Des Moines, Iowa, and the co-owner of Updown Arcade Bars. I really enjoyed my conversation with Sam. He's an entrepreneur at heart and tells detailed stories in this podcast about the founding of his businesses from the early days when he was 19 to present day with a full-blown music festival and bars across the Midwest. I was really struck by the specific lessons in the conversation with Sam. Lessons like being persistent even to the point of annoyance, which sounds like a benefit in his business, but might be a benefit in any business. Running a transparent business is another lesson, a transparency with employees and customers alike. He tells great stories about that. How best to use a mentor, how honest and trusting that mentor relationship needs to be. He certainly was given some honest feedback from his mentor, who learned it from his mentor. So those are great stories. Listen closely for that. And even advice on starting a business. You know, when is the right time to quit your day job, quote unquote. So the some really great lessons there from him. So without further delay, here's the Talent Playbook Podcast with Sam Summers. Hey, Sam, thanks for being on the podcast today. Really appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure, our pleasure. So when we spoke in the past, you know, we my research and our prep conversation for this podcast, we talked a little bit about your businesses, First Fleet Concerts, Updown Arcade Bars. Just tell our listeners a little bit about both those businesses. They may not know of those businesses, and I'd like them to understand, have that context before we really dig in.
Sure. So, you know, I started my company by just booking concerts as a senior in high school. And it was local bands that I started with, just booking them at a local DIY hall. And, you know, my history as a young kid was just, I was always kind of, you know, trying to make money off of stuff. So I quickly found a way, like, hey, how can I turn this into, like, how can I monetize, like, booking concerts and doing that, that sort of thing? Because I enjoy going to concerts, but I'd like to be more involved. So, you know, I found myself going out of town to a lot of these concerts in Iowa City or Minneapolis. And I made some contacts with some bands that, you know, I really liked, and one of those bands was Fall Out Boy. And we exchanged emails back and forth. We ended up booking them a show in Des Moines, which is where I live. And, just this small club, you know, I booked it through the band, and, you know, the next time I booked them a couple times, and, you know, the next time I did them, they had an agent, and so that's when it kind of became official. We had contracts and all that stuff. You know, it was
it's a real business when they
exactly.
Real business when they bring up the
so you know, you're looking at these contracts, and just, you know, I was young, didn't have anything to lose, so I was just like, oh sure, okay, yeah, that's fine. So we put together these shows. Now I'm working with agents. And the shows went well, and those bands, you know, they take out bands that are with other agents. And so that kind of spread to other agencies. And I just made sure to be persistent with all those agents, and started booking more and more concerts. And gradually that, you know, that kind of, I wouldn't say that started my business, but that started me understanding how I can monetize, you know, concerts.
So tell me quickly about the concert scene in Des Moines when you were growing up, right?
Sure.
Was it vibrant? Was there a need there? Why when you saw Fall Out Boy did you say, I've got to bring them to Des Moines?
So yeah, no, there wasn't really much going on in Des Moines. There was a few small clubs in the 90s that, you know, did shows here and there. But if I ever wanted to go see a band that was kind of hyped, or, you know, the hot band, I had to go to Minneapolis or Chicago or Kansas City. And Des Moines is kind of like that for a lot of our industries. I mean, there's, you know, we're starting to get a lot better here as we move along. But in our food world and music and arts and everything, it's just there's a lot of opportunity because not everything's been done here. So I felt like there was plenty of space to be able to bring these bands to Des Moines, and there turned out to be the support for it too.
Yeah. How did you tap into that support? Right. So obviously it's your friends, but when you book Fall Out Boy for the first time, are you just crossing your fingers that people will come, or how did you get people to come to the show?
So with them, it was a lot of bootlegging CDs and, recording them on CDRs and passing them out to people at the mall and telling them to check it out. That was really the way we got people into it. All of our friends listened to them, and it was simple then because there was only one band I was doing a show for, so I could just completely focus on it and just like, hey, you've got to hear this. And luckily, everybody liked the band, and it obviously ended up being a big thing. But it was definitely a lot of grassroots and just kind of putting headphones in people's ears and saying, hey, come see this. And it was, at first you're just kind of like, where am I going to do this show? All I know is these DIY halls. And luckily there was a couple of venues that were just getting opened in Des Moines around that time that I was able to jump in and put some shows together.
And those venues, I'm thinking if I'm, an adult who's running a music venue, and presume, how old were you when you were running Fall Out Boy into their first concert into Des Moines?
So I was 19, and where most of my peers were 19 as well.
So did people who were opening music venues, were they older adults? Did they take you seriously? How'd you find that?
That they did. I think that's the thing, is everybody in Des Moines is really supportive of everyone, and no one else was doing concerts, so they kind of needed people to put shows in their rooms. And I know with the first place I booked that concert was Vaudeville Muse, which is still around today, and they were really helpful, and their staff was kind of like, kind of nurtured me through the way. So
that's great. Yeah, that's great to know that people took you seriously and understood what you were trying to do. Did you have to convince anybody that, hey, listen, I'm serious in this business and here's what I'm trying to do in the art scene, or was everybody just open like that?
So everybody was open as far as the consumer goes, or people that were coming to the concerts.
Sure.
The hardest part is getting agents to respond, and there's this fine line between persistence and annoyance, and I cross it constantly, but it's necessary, and some people you'll never get back to them. They'll never get back to you, and you'll just keep working it and you don't hear back, but most of them will pay off. And I remember a lot of the people that would ignore me back in the day, maybe they're not what they were back then. And it's not like it's the tables have turned or anything, but it's just kind of funny looking back. And it's like, man, I tried so hard to get a hold of you when I was 20 years old. And, now it's like, you're begging me to do your shows, so it is kind of funny how that works. And that's why in my mind, I'm always careful about that. When I'm working with an agent and I'm working with their assistants, especially, I'm always respectful of them, because I know that someday they will have something I need. Yeah. So,
that's a great lesson. Making sure that you take care of those who someday will take care of you, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you're better off like burning the bridge with someone who's reached their full potential, and exactly what they are, rather than like being mean to someone's assistant or intern or something that someday is going to like have everything you need and want, and they'll remember that. So, that's a big thing. It's just treating people well. So.
Start with what I'll call passionate, humble beginnings with one show, one venue. Where are you today with First Fleet? What does that business look like today?
So after doing a few shows, I was dating a girl at the time that her dad was attorney, and he's like, hey, we should probably put together, a business for you and file with the state and get your, all your stuff to pay taxes and all that stuff. So
you should probably be paying tax.
Yeah. And you do a few shows and you're just like, oh yeah, I guess I'm making money. So I better, start doing what I'm supposed to do. So we got that going in, I believe it was 2003, which when I was a freshman at Iowa State. And at that point, I was starting to do a few more shows. Really, it was like one show a month, maybe. And doing them in Des Moines, mostly trying to find new venues. Some new venues were opening, and then I went through college, and we did I did my biggest show at this place called Val Air Ballroom in Des Moines for Fall Out Boy, when they kind of broke into the mainstream, and we sold out in advance 2,500, and I think at that point I was probably 20 years old, and I was like, man, this, I'm going to school right now for, I guess I started electronic engineering, and I switched over to marketing. I'm like, man, maybe I just, maybe I can do this real. And I, so after that show, things didn't go so well, and I had a few shows that did really poorly, and so it's this roller coaster, and so then I kind of decided, well, I guess I'll go to law school, because I'm not gonna be able to do anything with marketing, and I just don't know what I would do with that, and what didn't have the best grades in school either, so I kind of got things into gear, took a bunch of classes like I was going to be an attorney, and realized that I didn't have the attention span, or the desire to actually be an attorney. I think it was more just that paycheck. And so I was, I continued to do shows, got out of school with, better grades than I started with, because I was, aiming to go to law school. So graduated, went and worked, at the casino 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. while I was booking concerts during the day. And then I'd go in and, fall asleep at the table while dealing people cards.
What games did you deal?
I dealt blackjack mostly, but then some Pai Gow and 3-card poker. I think that was it for me, but that's a sad time to be in the casino, the 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. I've been in the casino at that time, but it's you see a lot of, sad stories. So
yeah. What so you said you had some concerts. So you have the big success, and then you say, gosh, I think I might be able to do this full time. You have some concerts that you thought weren't a success. What defines a success, and what defines not a success in those terms, and what you were looking at there?
I mean, it's all the volatility. And when you're not doing a ton of concerts and you have one, when it's basically just my personal bank account that is draining when I lose money on a show. And that's really hard at first. I remember my first loss, a substantial loss in my mind was $1,500. And it was really hard, like it was one of those things where you're staying up all night and just pretty upset about it. And at that point, you're kind of wondering, like, man, I'm working right now. I'm doing the same body of work, but I'm losing money on the concert. And so you just kind of question it. And that's when I realized I need something to kind of back me up, and then try to get this going. And once you get some momentum going with some winners, that's when it kind of takes off. So
yeah. So when you say something to back me up, is that financial support? Is that a mentor, someone who's been there before? What do you mean when you say I need something to back me up?
That financial support. So I need to be able to pay my bills, and my casino job, or what became a Wells Fargo job after that, was to basically live. And then this was kind of like a side job that I wanted to get going and have it be my main job, but it just wasn't ready. I wasn't able to go straight from college to be able to be full time. So,
and what about a mentor, right? So you get the financial backing. Was there somebody you looked to say, okay, help me do this better? How do I do this better? Somebody's been there before me, or really was it just you on your own, building this business?
Yeah. So it was a little bit before the mentor came into play. I had to figure out a lot of it on my own, asking questions. I had a few agents that really helped me. Fall Out Boy's agent was one. He would tell me, like, hey, this is how you do this. You should probably reach out to this person and work on this. And, you have a web of other concert promoters that are in the same shoes as you, that are maybe the same ages, and you kind of share data with them,
Okay.
And you talk about, hey, this show's going out. Did you get offered it? No. So, okay. So then you go and you reach out to that agent and you share the other way around. And then you kind of know what that band's worth, how they're doing in other markets. And that's really important information at first. I would say that, my mentor came randomly down the line, and he actually reached out to me. And I'm a pretty reserved, kind of cautious type person. And, I tend to doubt when, people are, genuine or real or whatever. And so this guy reached out to me, and I looked him up before I called him back. He left me a message, and his name was Steve White. And he left me a message and just asked if I wanted to get dinner, or lunch or something. And he wanted to, talk to me about concerts, and he had heard about me and whatnot. So when I looked him up, I found out that he was a concert promoter in the 70s in Des Moines. And he had done some big music festivals. And he was Bill Graham. Bill Graham's a local partner. So that's a big name. Yeah, the famous concert promoter from San Francisco. He did like the Grateful Dead and, Eagles and all those bands back in those days. And so to me, that was obviously really cool. And, so we went and got lunch and, had some great conversations. And I remember, the first time we met, he said, what have you heard about me? And I go, because I just asked around and people that, that he's kind of a grinder and whatnot. And so I told him that, and I go, and then he goes, well, you know what I've heard about you? I didn't even ask him, but he said, you know what I've heard about you? And I go, what's that? And he says, I heard you're extremely disorganized. And I was like, oh, wow, that's real. That's actually a flaw and something I probably need to improve on. So, he was very honest with me on different things, and I take those things to heart. So
that's great. I love the fact that he offered that without you asking, number one. And then so what did you do with his advice? Right, I hear you're disorganized. You leave that lunch, you think that's either the last time I'll talk to that guy or I'll do something about it. So obviously you did something about it,
right?
What'd you do? How'd you
approach? So you self-evaluate, and when what I've learned with him as I've grown, and I've taken more advice from him, is that, he's accurate, and everything is accurate for how he was when he did concerts in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And, some things have changed, but looking inward, it was like, I see how he does business, and I've done shows with him now, and he shows up to the concerts with these settlements as thick as a book with, these receipts for everything in order, typewriter in hand, and everything is just so pro. You don't do any work the day of the show, where I do a lot more volume in shows. We're doing probably 150 shows a year. And it's a lot quicker and faster. And, I don't get to put the kind of time into shows, that he did back in the day, which is too bad because that was a fun way of doing concerts. But how I corrected, myself was just keeping better records and keeping, more organization and, communicating better. I think that was, it was a good lesson. And he gave me some lessons later on too. I remember, I guess we're moving this story kind of along here, but down the line, I opened up this venue, and, after booking concerts a while, I opened up this venue, Woolies, which is 700 cap. And I remember I invited him to my soft opening. It was like,
sorry, you just said 700 cap. So you opened a music venue in Des Moines, right?
Yep. Yes.
And when you say 700 cap, that means what?
700 capacity. So it's kind of a smaller club. But it was a club size that was needed in the market. So some of these shows I did my first, or some of these venues I did my first shows at were, 200 to 300 capacity, and we were selling them out quite a bit. So I needed this space, this bigger space to do bigger shows so I could continue to compete with other markets and bring more stuff to Des Moines. So I bring Steve in. I invite him, and it's a hectic night. Obviously, I'm proud of opening my venue. It's my opening night. I've invited all my friends and everything, and I think everything goes great. Everybody always tells you how great everything is. You never get any feedback, but then I go home at that night after like 2 a.m. and he sends me an email, and it's like talking about how what I did wrong with my venue, and it was like, to me, it didn't bother me because it's coming from him, and it's info that's valuable to me, and things that are he's just brutally honest on things, and so I get with my manager and say, hey, we need to pay attention to these things, and make sure people are attentive to whatever, and I just thought that was funny, though. It's like, my first night that I'm trying to have a, good time and soak it in, I get an email from him. So, but that's just kind of how it is.
Well, keeps your feet on the ground, right?
Exactly.
Like somebody like that.
Yep.
I'm sure that happened to him, and I wonder what the letter that Bill Graham sent him after, his first time that was like.
He told me it was a lot more brutal than that. I actually know one of his stories that he called Steve White, and Steve was hanging out with all his friends here, and Steve was a lot younger. I think he was probably in his 20s or 30s, and so he'd done his first show with Bill Graham, and so he's sitting around there. Bill calls, and Steve thinks he's gonna be funny. He knows he's in trouble with Bill, and he thinks he's gonna be funny. So he kind of puts I think he puts the phone on speaker, or at least so people can hear what's going on. And and he tells Steve that the only thing he knows how to do is sell tickets, and that he's got this accent for me. He says, all you know how to do is sell tickets. You don't know how to run a concert. And something about flying out to Des Moines in his jet and poking his eyes out. So
that's
he was a little bit softer on me. So, but that is funny. Like, he had those lessons early too. And that's probably what kind of scared him into being as good as he is. So.
Well, it's great hearing stories of people's mentors and the lessons that you learned. I mean, clearly you're open to feedback, which is what somebody who has a mentor needs to be. But also when you're talking about just being honest, obviously you guys connected and trusted each other enough to be able to have those interactions. So that's incredibly important. And, one other thing that you said that I want to just point out too, I think is really interesting is, what I would call in sort of a geeky, jargony way is tribal learning, right? The way you learned to do this business was from other people who did the same thing, and you'd trade information, and, some people last in the business and some people don't. And those that take that tribal learning and they, internalize it and do it differently next time. There's a lot of success lies in that information and gathering information that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's this kind of, when you're sharing information with people, you're obviously not going to give them all of the information that they're going to, hurt. You're not going to give them enough information where they can, have an unfair advantage with you. But it's like, I have people in Omaha, I have people in Arizona, Minneapolis, Milwaukee that we kind of talk and we learn, and it's you kind of learn by failing on a lot of things, right? And you take some hard lessons, and you learn like which shows are going to do best for you in your market or in a different market you're working, and it's just stuff that's not really laid out there, and there's no magazines or data that shows like how is this show going to do in Omaha versus Des Moines, so.
Yeah, right. You just have to try it, see what happens. So you are the co-owner of another business called Up Down Arcade Bars. So tell us about that business quickly.
Yeah. So we started Up Down as just a bar that we wanted to have next to our venue. It's right next door to Woolies in a basement. And Up Down's an arcade bar that it was kind of a new concept at the time. But it's these bars that have tons of old cabinets in them, old arcade cabinets and whatnot. And we'd gone on a bachelor party and saw one in Vegas, and we're like, I think we can do a different kind of spin on this and do it in Des Moines and really work with our other business. And so we did that. We opened it on a shoestring budget, which is how we kind of did everything up to that point. And opened it in like 2 months at this space next to us, and it went really, really well. And so I have two other partners on that, that they're both from Iowa City and own a venue in Iowa City that I used to do shows at. So we decided we were going to start poking around in some other markets. We had no idea what we were doing, but we knew we had a manager that lived in Kansas City that was working a corporate job that we could have, that was interested in managing if we opened one in Kansas City. So we spent a lot of time going down there, looking at spaces, and finally found one that we liked. And it's funny, we actually worked out like a contract to buy this building. It was all ready to go, and then someone swooped in last second and purchased it, cash purchase, and now that's our landlord. So, so hopefully someday he's nice enough to sell us the building. But that's how we started down there, and that one just really took off. Partly because we had great management, but also just we were in the right area. We were kind of the only game in the area for people to go, and an activity based bar around a bunch of restaurants is usually great for before and after dinner. So. That went really well, and since then we've expanded up into Minneapolis, which is a great location. We're up in downtown Minneapolis, and then now we just bought our first building in Milwaukee that we're going to be opening in probably May or June. So
that's great. So I want to talk a little bit about how you run a business like that, right? So the other side of this conversation is, where'd you get the idea, and how did you decide that? And the Vegas story is cool, but I'm interested in, you went from a job that was one person finding one band and booking one concert to now you are a co-owner of a business with multiple locations. Obviously, you've got lots of employees who have to run those locations. And how did you go from being essentially a sole proprietor to someone who's running businesses with employees? What was that journey like?
So first I will say, when you're making money, everything is a lot easier. It's
a lot of problems.
Yeah, it makes things a lot easier, and everybody has patience and whatnot. So that was helpful. But I was lucky to have a managing partner that is basically our location opener. He goes down, he's on the ground when we open it, the construction, and then sees like all the hiring, helps with our local GM doing all the hiring and ordering and all that stuff, and he loves it. Like that, he loves doing that. He loves that, that rush of opening the new spot. And so that's really important for us, and that's kind of how we've been able to expand and open different locations, is having him on the ground and the interest in moving to these different markets and spending 6 to 8 months in each of these markets. So beyond that, having good managers that we bring up within our company, or finding and recognizing great talent, that's just so important. Whenever you're having issues, that's the first person you go to, and to kind of look at numbers, like see what's going on. And that's so important, having a great manager.
Yeah, I think that can't be underestimated, right? It goes along the lines of the mentor conversation that we were having. So how involved are you in the hiring of the team members at the for First Fleet or for the arcade bar?
So I'm for First Fleet, basically, I've done a couple hires, and then I kind of let my hires hire the rest. So I'm not the best manager. I'm not, like, things I like about one of our partners at Updown is that he's super direct, and he can deal with an issue before it becomes an issue, and it's not awkward for anyone. And that's something that I'm not great at. I try to become better at it by observing and understanding how he does that. But sometimes there's just people that are better at certain things, and that's why we make a great partnership, because my partner can do all the hiring and, I guess firing and understanding like how to develop employees. I think with First Fleet, and this may be completely wrong, but my kind of philosophy is to let people learn on their own and kind of develop their own tendencies and then reel them back in if they're not doing something correct, correct that. But I feel like if I were to tell someone that works for me exactly how to be, they would just be a clone of me. And, that's not always the best for every job. So I feel like I look to, I've got this guy that's my production manager who's also doing some booking now. His name's Burke. And, just I kind of let him use his personality and how he runs shows. And I don't tell him a ton. I've given him access to all my emails. He can see how I communicate with agents and, bands and whatnot. But I like to have him kind of dive in and then reel back if I need to. So I don't know. That's kind of how I do it. And that doesn't work the best for a bar, but it works great for a First Fleet. So
yeah, I love that transparency that you give to him, right? That's part of the learning process, whether that's
right.
really structured or why you were doing it, or if it's just easier to communicate with him. But I love that transparency. It's such an important thing to have as a manager. When you're running these businesses, what metrics are you using to know whether you're successful or not? We talked about the one concert that lost money, right? So obviously, whether you make or lose money is a metric, but is that the only metric? What else are you using to run the business?
Yeah, so I would say that the bars are a lot easier to use metrics and, understanding employee costs and, what we're spending on alcohol and whatnot. I look at that data a lot closer when we have our quarterly meetings where, we're kind of just mining through all that data and saying like, well, why is that number so high? Why are we, why are we spending so much here and sales are down this month. And so it's a lot easier with the bar. But with First Fleet, I'm pretty fluid with our budget, like I do a festival for underneath my First Fleet brand called Hinterland. And I know what things cost, but I don't run the tightest budget. Like I'm not setting up a pro forma and like knowing what it needs to make and, all this stuff. It's just, in that aspect, in that particular property, Hinterland, I need it to be a really great event and I need people to really love that. And if I start looking at it really closely and looking at the numbers too closely, I start making decisions, to improve my bottom line. And some of those things I'm giving up some quality and, I don't know. I just can't help myself. If I look too closely at the numbers, I'll cut certain things that I know I can save money on that I don't need for that to happen, for the festival to happen. But, some examples like, we spend $50,000 in artist catering, right? And I could probably do it for $10,000, but I want my artist to talk about the catering and how good it is. So I hired a wedding caterer and, they do like everything and everybody always talks about it and they tell their agents, they tell other bands. And that was one of the first things that I was told when I was producing a festival. I said, what are things that you hear about? Obviously people hear about crowds, but there's a lot of good crowds. So, one of the agents told me, he said, catering, that's all they talk about. They want good food. Good food. I want good food. Like I'm going to a festival that has good food. And he had some examples of these festivals that had the best catering. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm going to hit catering out of the park. And that kind of became like, I'm going to make sure every experience is great for the band. Because that's what I can give them. I live in Des Moines and we're not going to have the biggest crowd. So I can work on things that are going to make them feel like they're at home or even better, So we just started kind of building on that backstage. I mean, this last year we had Ryan Adams headline one of our night and he's a big video game guy. Yeah, he's and I own video game places. So it was like a really great, I had a good opportunity to put something together. So we put him this little private arcade and I watched a bunch of videos about him, like what his interviews with him and what his favorite arcades are and favorite pinball and whatnot. We put together this arcade. He ended up being kind of sick and didn't come off the tour bus other than going to stage, so he didn't see it. But the tour manager's like, yeah, it was good. We appreciate you doing that.
Right. You research and you care about somebody. I imagine the comforts of home in some way are important if you're on a bus going from place to place to place. So do I would think of that in terms of satisfaction scores. Do you measure satisfaction in that way, or do you just you know it, or you get that feedback?
Not a numbers way. We do surveys. One thing we stress with Hinterland is absolute transparency and customer service. So we've basically, our first year of Hinterland, which was 2015, it flooded in Des Moines. We had to move it 3 days out from the festival, and we're moving a festival that's doing 8,000 people a day, right, with crazy infrastructure, and we had already started setting up at our location. So we found this backup location. We had it, a contract already for it. So we moved it down there, and I had my team get together, and I'm like, all right, I want to answer every single question. I want everything, I want everybody to know everything. So we had this little war room we set up where I had 5 people working on email. We did a Reddit AMA, tweets, answering basically everything anybody sent at us, and at least giving an attempt to answer it, and not hiding behind, the internet and not responding to certain questions. So from the get-go, I was like, well, I like this transparency. I think it's, I feel more like a person, as this business feels more like a person when I can communicate and I can be truthful about everything. And that's how we kind of grew it. And, a lot of festivals, you'll see them do tickets on sale before the lineup is released, and that's something we don't do because I feel like there's a lot of consumer disappointment when they're buying tickets and then they get the lineup. It's not something they wanted, so you've purchased something that you don't really want. So
right,
that's kind of how we do everything, is just try to be as transparent as possible. So
just this conversation is really really great for a number of reasons. The amount of transparency you have with your team and with the people that you produce concerts for, and the way that you grew up in the business and learning from others and all. I just really think it's such a great story. I'm interested to know what piece of advice you'd have for somebody starting their business career, whether it's in the music business or any other business. What are a couple of those lessons that you learned that you'd tell somebody else if they asked you?
Start small and go as slow as you can. And if you're thinking about quitting your job to start a business, work 6 months longer and try to get it going to where you physically can't work that other job. When I was working at Wells Fargo, I was answering emails on my breaks, walking around the lake and taking phone calls and skipping lunch. That's the kind of things you have to do in order to launch a successful business. And I would always tell someone, if they think they're ready, then they should wait another 6 months. And you can run a business while you're working another job. You don't, I know it can be difficult sometimes, but I think that's important. It's something, it's something you really just have to push yourself to do. So.
No, I think that's great. I think that people romanticize I'm quitting my job and I'm starting this company because I'm fed up. I think there's there's a way to be successful and responsible at the same time. Right. So actually, I think it's
the deduction thing. If people talk about the deductions and I want my own business so I can deduct things. And
right.
That means you have to spend that money, right?
Right. It's not free.
It's not just this free deal. You have to So anyway, I think that there's a lot of people that get into business, for the wrong reasons, and those businesses don't work out. I think it's about grind and really making yourself uncomfortable before things get better. I mean, I constantly struggle still with different things. I've got this agent that I've been doing business with for a long time, and she's not the best communicator. But I've been trying to reach her for 6 months about just general avails, not responding to any of my emails, any of my phone calls. Meanwhile, she's booking stuff with other people. I have no reason to know why she's not communicating with me, but I still struggle. There's still those kind of struggles. And, that's a product of not being one of the biggest, and not being one of these huge companies that can kind of, force every agent to work with them. Yeah. So I would say up to like 4 or 5 years ago, there's still periods when you're running a business where you're like, am I going to be able to make this work? I think once we got the bars open, I feel like I've kind of spread myself out a little bit more. And it's just about getting to the point where you can't be sunk, I guess. And that's how you stay an entrepreneur, is just get to the point where you can't, if something really bad happens, that you can still maintain, working for yourself. And I feel like I've gotten there, but I try to make low risk decisions when I can, just to try to preserve that. So
yeah. Well, obviously you're passionate about these businesses, which I think goes a long way too, right? You have a taste for it, you have an eye for it, and then you also understand that what's at risk at the business. So I think that's great. And I I haven't been to the Hinterland Festival, but I'll look it up, and we'll urge our listeners to check it out. And maybe you'll have a couple of other people there who haven't been there before.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you bring up a good point. I think it's important to do things that are within your lane and know what your strengths are, and really push, build things that you are an expert on. And that doesn't mean you can't start other businesses that surround that particular business. But like, to me, going and starting like a fine dining restaurant would just be a disaster, because I have no idea how to do that. And, I think you have to really capitalize on what you're good at and know your strengths. And that's something that I have to remind myself sometimes. When you see people that are just like killing it doing something, you're like, yeah, but I'm not passionate about that, so I probably wouldn't do it as well, so.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah.
Sam Summers, thanks so much for spending some time with us here today, and best of luck to you. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Thank you for listening to the Talent Playbook podcast with our guest, Sam Summers. To learn more about Sam's businesses, you can visit firstfleetconcerts.com and updowndsm.com. And for more on the Hinterland Music Festival, visit hinterlandiowa.com. You can also listen to other episodes of the Talent Playbook podcast at outmatch.com. Look under the About menu. Thanks to our producer and engineer, Charles Summers. And until next time, this is Jason Ferrara saying thanks for listening.